Contact Protocol, Episode 4. Senior Engineer Linda Yang looked at her elder sister, Programmer Grace Yang, as she ran the modified gravity controller through the diagnostic simulator. "How is it coming, Grace?" she asked, trying to keep the excitement out of her voice. Grace looked back at Linda with a lopsided smile. "You know, never mind about this program. You may have to take a look at the gravity plating in here, as I think we're actually floating off the deck with excitement." Linda huffed and threw her arms up. "It's freaking aliens, Grace. Aliens!" Grace appeared to consider this for a moment. "So what? You figure you might finally be able to get to meet someone who hasn't had to hear you go through every bit of engineering from Star Trek at least 10 times? I can see why you're so pumped." Scowling, Linda replied, "Hey, I have you know that I'm still only halfway through the 9th repetition with Julian, and I'm pretty sure that Amy has only had to hear the full set once." Grace tapped a few keys as a prompt appeared on the screen before responding. 1. Amy has only been on the ship a couple of months. And 2. Julian spends as much time as possible flying about in a shuttle to avoid having to listen to you, breaking down how awesome it would be to have warp drives instead of the rather lame Star Wars hyperdrives. As if flying around in space faster than light isn't absolutely the coolest thing already, regardless of how we ended up doing it. Grunting, Linda stuffed her hands into the pockets of her overall, shuffling her feet for a couple of minutes, suitably chastised. "How do you think it happened anyway?" she asked suddenly. "How do you think that they ran into a hyperspace interference? I mean, we were pretty much able to spot the interference and work out how to avoid it before we even developed functional hardware to skip, let alone enter hyperspace itself. And I can't imagine that many other species would have such a different approach to scientific progress, having gotten this far. I just can't work it out." Linda sighed. "I don't know. Maybe they're just weird. Maybe it was kind of an accident. Maybe they forgot to have their hyperbrake serviced at the last MOT and needed to figure out some way to stop without one. I guess we'll have to ask them." The console beeped and spat out the data chip. "Either way, your new GravPlate controller software is done, and you could go off and play with your robots again, and leave us bitty programmers alone for a while. We are trying to unpack and optimize the translator software from Contact Protocol files, after all." Wallach landed awkwardly, grappling the handles around the door to the environmental control room with his 4 lower limbs, his wings retracting beneath their covers. Whatever had stopped the normal spin of the ship had massively reduced the apparent gravity, as well as changed its orientation. There was now only a slight pull towards the front of the ship, as if they were either being slowed or pulled backwards through space. A mystery to solve later. He reached out with one of his graspers to slide the door open, only to recoil and gag, as the stench of blood and vomit punched the chemical receptors lining his airways. "By the tree," he muttered, covering his mouth with his free grasper before leaning his head into the room. It was an absolute mess. Smashed screens and control surfaces littered the far wall with glass, and long streaks of blood splattered the wall, floor, and ceiling. Bracing himself, Wylak pushed himself fully into the room and dropped slowly to the far wall, where the trails of blood seemed to be most concentrated. Carefully, he started pulling the piles of equipment out of the way, much of it slick with warm blood and stomach acid, which stung against the receptors on his graspers and mid-limb claws. The pile shifted slightly underneath him, and Willac paused. "Sibling? Can you hear me?" A faint sigh and murmuring was all he could hear. "Sibling?" No, don't hurt me," rasped a voice. "I am here to help you, sibling. I am digging you out. Stay still," called Willac, trying to insert his most reassuring tone of voice, the one he used with the very young hatchlings who refused to come out of the roots once their eggs hatched. And so he bent to his task again, lifting the last few bits of debris aside, revealing a severely battered male. "No, don't hurt me again," the male said, feebly trying to defend his remaining eye with a broken grasper as he coughed up blood from between his mandibles. "Again?" muttered Willac to himself before addressing the male. "Brother, I am Willac, the warden. Are you brother—" He searched his memory as he tried to match the shell patterning he could see through the blood to someone he recognized. "Mavel? I remember you hatching. Let me help you." Willac reached for Mavel, who recoiled in fear and attempted to raise one of his lower claws to defend himself. But the limb abruptly ended at the first joint. "No!" he screamed, as Willac flinched in horror. "Mavel, what happened? Surely this couldn't have happened in the crash." Willac suddenly looked around at all of the smashed equipment. Equipment that should have been securely attached to the walls and floor. Equipment that he now realized had distinctly claw-shaped marks across and through much of it. His head bobbed as he tried to take in as much of the room at once as possible, while what remained of his antenna quivered. Mavel, who did this? Julian feathered the tractor beam strength slightly to reduce the strain on the inertial dampeners. It took a lot of energy displacement for a relatively small shuttle to manhandle a much larger vessel, and he didn't want to redline any of the systems before they had even really done anything other than slow down the alien ship. Ahmed was still at his station, although the two engineers from earlier had disappeared to assemble the portable airlock and docking collar, along with a number of technicians from the rescue team. Now he was talking to Dr. White and Dr. Jin, the two doctors on board. "Well, yeah, of course we can rig up something to produce different heat patterns on some sort of screen. We've already got built-in IR cameras in our suit optical suites, so nothing else needed on that side. But why, doctors?" Ahmed asked quizzically. White and Jin glanced at each other before Jin replied, her thick accent clearly marking her as someone from the Martian archaeologies. "Well, Dr. White and I were talking about the massive amount of infrastructure they have dedicated to precise thermal regulation. Orders of magnitude finer than anything we feel the need to have, even in our archaeologies. Often when we see this kind of behavior in nature, it relates to some significant aspect of the creature who put it in place. Certain colored objects collected for courtship ritual can indicate particularly strong visual receptors for that color. Or that is the color of the primary prey species, etc." Dr. White nodded and continued. "So, with this level of interest and the ability to control temperature, we think that they may have a natural understanding of temperature far greater than ours. And so it is reasonable to think that this may include a greater use of the infrared spectrum in their vision. The ship has no lights in what is our visible spectrum, but it is shining like a star in infrared range." Julian turned back to his console and ran through some of the commands to query the memory banks of their approach and station keeping. Ahmed nodded and considered. Yeah, but that may also just be because their ship is broken and trying to vent excess heat to avoid cooking the crew. Look, we've not heard anything on the communication channel we've tried. The ship has no identifiable way in, and we will be switching to active sensors soon. I would rather wait to confirm what you are saying before ruining a bunch of perfectly good tablet displays. Well, how about this? Ahmed sighed. How about what? Julian beckoned him over to his console, where he had the computer do a comparative analysis of each frame of the footage, looking for relatively fixed points of heat over time, and display the results. Equally spaced, running down from the front to the back of the craft on 4 sides, were some fuzzy glyphs, said Jin after a few moments of peering at the rendered images. Ahmed squinted and turned his head this way and that. Okay, maybe you're onto something, but can someone please tell me they see the same thing that I'm looking at? Dr. White coughed nervously and shuffled his feet. You first, Ahmed. Everyone turned to look at Ahmed. Please don't make me say it, he said, shaking his head, skin visibly blushing dark red, even through his visor. Come on, Julian, you must see it too. Julian carefully schooled his face into a picture of innocence. Sorry, Ahmed, but I was never very good at languages. What does it look like? Knowing he was defeated, Ahmed sighed. You kids. Fine. It looks like, well, some kind of Kama Sutra if the people were replaced with praying mantises. The other 3 shared a look before bursting into laughter. Eventually Jin managed to cough out. Oh, thank God, I thought it was just me.